Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another video, and I hope you're all having a good Easter. So yeah, last night was a pretty interesting night of boxing. There was actually quite a few cards happening simultaneously, and it was one of the rare occasions in recent years where I decided to stay up to watch the cards, because there was a few fights that piqued my interest, and I really wanted to see them. So it was a weird situation where I was kind of watching multiple fights at the same time, and flipping back and forth between them, and some of them I actually had to catch up afterwards because I wasn't able to see them live and whatnot. But yeah, I saw quite a few fights last night, so there's quite a lot to talk about here, so this might turn out to be a long video. The one that I want to focus mostly on, however, and I'll talk about this afterwards, is the Zurdo Ramirez Gulamerian fight. As you guys know, I made a prediction video for that fight, and it pretty much went exactly as I said it would in my prediction. And I wanted to talk about that fight, and specifically about Zurdo Ramirez, because there's a lot of things about him that I want to talk about. But before I get into that, because I've got a lot to say there, I want to talk about some of the other fights that took place last night. So, first of all, one of the fights I was able to catch live was the Romero versus Isaac Pitbull Cruz fight. Now, that was at £140, I believe, for the WBA title. Romero was making his first title defense. He was basically given that title in a highly disputed, highly controversial stoppage against Ismael Barroso, who was kind of a fringe contender at 140. And yeah, this was him making his first defense. Again, that fight went exactly as I thought it would go. I always thought from day one that Pitbull Cruz was all wrong for Rolly Romero, that he just brought way too much for the to the table for the fight. And I gotta be perfectly honest, looking at Rolly Romero, and I haven't really spoke much about him on this channel because I haven't really had much to say, and other people have covered it better than I could. Rolly Romero, to me, is truly, truly awful. He's one of these fighters who, I look at him and I think, forget the fact that he was a world champion, right? Forget the fact that he fought on pay-per-view. Forget the fact that he's been on the world stage, headlining cards on several occasions. Forget all that. I look at this guy and I think to myself, how on earth does this guy even have a winning record? Because you look at Rolly Romero, he looks to me like a guy who has never boxed a day in his life. Like, when I see him in the ring, I see the way he holds his hands, I see the way that he bounces around the ring in circles, just completely wasting energy. I see the way that he tries to throw punches, and I see the lack of technique, the lack of class, the lack of overall grace, just the fact that he seems to be completely off balance, completely defenseless, and just completely and utterly uncoordinated and clueless. And I think to myself, how on earth does this guy have a winning record? It just doesn't make any sense. And that's not the first time I thought that about a professional fighter. There's a lot of guys in professional boxing who, they have these very, very impressive records on paper. Some of them have like multiple strings of knockouts against guys with winning records. And then you see these guys fight, and you think to yourself, how were these guys ever even able to win a professional boxing match? That's exactly what I think when I look at Rolly Romero. He looks to me like a guy who has maybe had one or two boxer-size sessions and has never actually sparred before, has never hit the pads, has never even been taught how to throw a punch, or how to put his hands up, or how to stand, or how to bend at the waist, or, you know, how to move across the ring without tripping over his own feet. That's honestly what I think when I look at Rolly Romero. I just think to myself, how on earth does this guy even compete in boxing? Somehow he's been able to amass a pretty impressive record on paper, and was somehow able to become a world champion. I just don't get it, man. But yeah, talking about the fight itself, it was kind of similar to the Josh Warrington-Lee Wood fight, and I kind of compared it to that fight in a few comment sections a while back when the fight first got announced. And what I meant by that was, You have Romero, who's kind of gangly and wide open to get hit and a bit clumsy, but somehow he must have power, because you see the guy's record, he has a lot of knockouts. So, I kind of compared him to Lee Wood in that sense. And Pitbull Cruz to me is more similar to Josh Warrington. He's a guy who holds a tight guard, comes forward, bends at the waist, bobs and weaves a bit, gets inside, and looks to smother you on the inside and basically piece you up with hooks and uppercuts in combination. He's more of a high volume, high effort pressure fighter. He actually really reminds me of Josh Warrington stylistically. So that's kind of how I looked at the fight. And I just felt that Cruz would get inside and just capitalise on that completely non-existent defence of Rolly Romero and just beat him up and probably stop him. And that was exactly what happened. Romero was completely clueless. The only defence that he had at any stage of the fight was to hold, because, the only way to stop Cruz from applying relentless pressure and backing him up to the ropes and hitting him with hooks was to grab a hold of him and clinch. And he actually had a point deducted in the fight, which kind of spelled the beginning of the end for him. And you knew watching it was only a matter of time before he got viciously knocked out. So yeah, the referee saved his life and waved the fight off. So yeah, kind of a shocking exposure there for Rolly Romero. I don't expect to see that guy on the world stage ever again. I suspect he will probably drop down to journeyman level now, which how he even got there in the first place, again, is beyond me, but I digress. The other fight I wanted to talk about, which I believe was on that same card, and this was a fight I was watching at the same time as the Ramirez fight. I was kind of switching back and forth between the two, was the Tszyu versus Sebastian Fundora fight. Now, this fight never sat right with me from day one when I heard about it. I mean, Tszyu was, of course, training to fight Keith Thurman, who's, of course, a former welterweight champion, a guy who's shorter than him, smaller than him, has been incredibly inactive over the years, and, of course, is an orthodox fighter, and just a guy who, stylistically, you would assume would suit somebody like Tszyu, who's more of a fundamental back foot boxer, and kind of a boxer-puncher. And I just felt that was an easy fight for him. He would destroy Keith Thurman with ease. Then, of course, Keith Thurman pulled out with an injury, which is something that Keith Thurman is known for. And they replaced him with Sebastian Fundora, who's like a flipping 6'5" or however tall he is, southpaw, a guy who boxes behind a jab and has a kind of a high volume, long-range boxer style. So that was kind of an odd replacement opponent for Tszyu, I always thought, and it was a little bit of it was a little bit suspicious to me. It kind of seemed like a bit of a setup. But the way that the fight went was pretty hard to watch, if truth be told. So Tszyu comes out in the early rounds, absolutely batters and pulverizes Sebastian Fundora, breaks his nose, has him bleeding out the mouth, has him completely and utterly just timed, and you get the sense it's only a matter of time before he's going to knock the guy out. Then, towards the end of one of the rounds, I believe it was either the second or third round, Tszyu kind of leans in to throw a punch, and it was like Fundora brought his left elbow up to kind of block a punch, and the elbow collided with Tszyu's head and basically split his head open. He had a horrendous gash right on his hairline, and it was from the elbow. And basically, as soon as that landed, blood started bleeding profusely out of his head and into his eyes. And for the entire fight from that point on, Tszyu was basically a mask of blood. There was blood everywhere. And it was just horrible. It was horrible to look at. And I thought after that happened, I was like, surely they're going to stop the fight and this is going to be a no contest, because there is no way on this earth that Tszyu is going to be able to get through this fight and perform to the best of his ability with literally his head split open to the point where there is blood gushing into both of his eyes and he can barely see a thing. And it's affecting his reflexes And you consider that with the fact that it's also giving Sebastian Fundora a major tactical advantage, because again, all he has to do is keep at long range and keep firing that right jab, and the gash is going to get worse and worse. And Tszyu, who's a shorter guy, who is more of an effort fighter, he has to lunge in and move his head to land punches. There's no way Tszyu's going to get through this fight. That's what I was thinking. But yeah, they didn't stop the fight. They kept it going. I remember there was a moment during round 5 where I was thinking to myself, surely if the fight gets stopped now, they'll go to the scorecards. And I think at that point in the fight, Tszyu is probably ahead on the cards. So if I was Tszyu's manager, or if I was his trainer and whatnot, I would be imploring the ringside doctor to examine the cut and to stop it so that they can go to the scorecards and he could win the fight. But that wasn't what happened. Clearly, Tszyu didn't want the fight stopped. He wanted to go out there and win the fight legitimately. And yeah, he almost did it. The fight was actually very, very close. And despite the fact that Tszyu's face for the entire fight was basically a mask of blood, he was still having a lot of success. He was landing the cleaner, more effective punches from what I could remember. The problem is it was sparing. He wasn't landing enough punches to make it so that he could win the rounds clearly. And as I mentioned before, Fundora, who's a big, tall, lanky fighter who throws a lot of straight punches from long range, he was just pumping that jab out constantly. And he was landing it enough to the point where he was scoring points and just doing enough to win some of the rounds. So yeah, the fight went 12 rounds, and yeah, Fundora ended up winning by a split decision. Close fight in my opinion. I wouldn't have argued if Tszyu had gotten the decision, because I do think that throughout the fight, he was the effective aggressor, and his punches were definitely more effective and meaningful. I mean, aside from the elbow, I don't really think that Fundora did any real substantial damage in the fight with any of his punches. He was mostly just throwing arm punches from what I can remember. So, yeah, from what I saw of the fight, it was very close. It could have gone either way, but I don't really have an argument with the decision. I just think it's a little bit unfortunate and a little bit farcical how an elbow, which is an illegal blow in boxing, an elbow, it's illegal, was allowed to dictate the outcome of this fight. And I really think if Tszyu and his team weren't so short-sighted, they would have pushed for the fight to be stopped. I think it should have been, because if that were the case, if it were a no contest, he would be able to keep a hold of his title. And if he obviously went to the scorecards in round 5, he would have won the fight on points. So, or at least I think he would have anyway. So, yeah, it was poorly handled, in my opinion, by the officials. I don't think that it should have been allowed to go 12 rounds with Tszyu in that state from an illegal blow. So, yeah, disappointing result for Tszyu, but he definitely showed a lot of heart. If the two have a rematch, and if Tszyu has a full training camp where he prepares specifically for Fundora as the opponent and for that kind of style, I think he destroys Sebastian Fundora, probably even by stoppage. I definitely don't think the better man won. I think the better man of the two was Tszyu. So it's a setback for Tszyu, but we'll see where he goes from here. Another fight I watched the Kubrat Pulev fight, which was in Bulgaria. I didn't manage to catch that one live. I watched it afterwards when it got uploaded to YouTube. Kubrat Pulev, that fight was interesting to me because, of course, Pulev was supposed to fight for the WBA title against Manuel Char. However, Manuel Char ended up pulling out. And look, Manuel Char, again, he's known for it. He's another one of these fighters who just can't be trusted to turn up on fight night. I mean, he's had so many defenses of that WBA title be cancelled to the point where it's basically become a meme. Like, that WBA regular title, particularly in the heavyweight division, has basically become a meme at this point. And yeah, it's a shame the fight never happened, because it would have been somewhat interesting at least. The opponent that they brought in, it was this big Ukrainian guy who kind of looks like Butterbean. He actually did okay in the early rounds. He applied a lot of pressure. He landed a few little cuffing shots on the inside. But for the most part, I thought that Pulev was in control. He just outworked him. At long range, the fight was a mismatch. He couldn't get by Pulev's jab. Pulev was like feinting with the jab and keeping him under control with lead hand control and creating openings to get round the guard. Like he was whipping in left uppercuts from long range. He was kind of moving around the ring laterally and just piecing the guy up from the outside. And what did surprise me about the fight, and I'm not saying that Pulev looked great or anything like that, but what did surprise me is that despite being 42 years old, Pulev actually showed very, very good stamina. He was actually the much fitter guy of the two. And I'm actually surprised that at 42 years old, he's able to throw as many punches as he is. Like in the 12th round of the fight, Pulev was still throwing a lot of shots. He was still moving, he's still got good legs. And I think that just for a 42-year-old man, I thought he looked pretty good. And yeah, I was somewhat impressed with his fitness. The problem is he doesn't hit that hard anymore. And he was never that big a puncher even in his prime. But yeah, it was an okay little fight to watch. It was somewhat entertaining. I actually didn't mind it. And the Ukrainian guy for a late replacement, he actually did come to win. And he actually made it the full 12 rounds and was in the fight the whole way. Even when he was losing, he kept trying, he kept throwing big shots, kept applying pressure, was trying to work the body. And I thought the guy did all right, to be fair, for a late replacement. So that was a pretty interesting one. There were a few other fights that took place, guys, I didn't really know much about. And I was only kind of half watching. But yeah, some of them were somewhat entertaining. So yeah, that's kind of the fights of slightly lesser consequence that took place last night. The main one I want to talk about, as I mentioned earlier, is of course Zurdo Ramirez taking on Gulamerian. Now, Ramirez was the slight favourite for the fight. However, there were quite a few people on the internet, from what I noticed, and people I spoke to, particularly if you look at the comment section of my prediction video, it was actually quite mixed on who people thought was going to win. But yeah, what surprised a lot of people was that Zurdo Ramirez not only won the fight, but he pretty much dominated the entire fight from start to finish. Me personally, I thought he won every single round. And not only was he the better of the two in terms of technical boxing skills, speed, movement, athleticism, and just general tactics, but what surprised me was that Zurdo Ramirez actually seemed like the stronger of the two. He was actually backing Gulamerian up. He was standing on the inside with him. He was able to take Gulamerian's punches without any problem whatsoever. I don't think Ramirez was even remotely fazed by a single punch that Gulamerian threw. Ramirez was, like I said, he was standing in the pocket. He was keeping his guard up. He would dip to the right and slip underneath Gulamerian's left hook, which is probably Gulamerian's best punch. He's one of these guys who's kind of a mid-range hooker, as some people call him, where he'll kind of throw a left to the body, then a left to the head, and then from that he'll kind of transition into an overhand right. He's a very effective two-handed puncher and pressure fighter. He's very similar to pretty much any fighter that trains with Murat Gassiev. That trains with Abel Sanchez. Of course, Murat Gassiev is another cruiserweight champion that trained with Abel Sanchez for a lot of years, and you can see the similarities between the two. He's also similar to Triple G in the way that he walks his opponents back to the ropes and sets up the knockout. That's kind of how Gulamerian fights. But to me, Zurdo Ramirez was able to completely and utterly deconstruct that style. He fought in some ways similarly to how Usyk fought when he fought Gassiev, where Usyk was using a lot of lateral movement and just peppering Gassiev with the jab, and occasionally he'll bring it to the body and he'll move to the right and he'll completely and utterly take away the pressure fighter's lead hand. And I just thought he looked very, very good to me. And there was even moments where I was watching the fight and I had money on Ramirez. I bet a bit of money on him. So I was kind of nervous because Ramirez would go the wrong way. Like he would move to the left. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're going to walk straight onto that right hand. But right as that was about to happen, I noticed that he kind of had his left hand, because Ramirez is a southpaw, he kind of had his left hand reactive, so that when Gulamerian would throw his own right hand, Ramirez was able to just parry it away and come back with a right hook, and then he was able to slip under Gulamerian's left hook, and then hit him to the body with the right hand. And I thought, to me, Kubrat Ramirez showed a certain kind of boxing IQ that you just can't teach a fighter. I thought he looked fantastic in there, and he completely and utterly controlled, schooled, and dominated every single round, in my opinion. And even in the 12th round, where you think, okay, he's ahead on points now, he's going to play it safe and just dance his way to a decision. No, he came right at Gulamerian and put a beating on him in the 12th round. Like, he actually was the aggressor in round 12, and Gulamerian, to me, was just loading up on big punches, trying to land one shot at a time, looking for the knockout, and he looked completely and utterly clueless to me. So, very, very impressed with Kubrat Ramirez. And those of you who have been following my channel will know that I have long been a believer in Kubrat Ramirez's boxing ability. He's one of these guys who, in my personal opinion, has the kind of talent that you just can't teach a fighter. Like, if you think back to his super middleweight days, he was absolutely massive for super middleweight. I mean, the guy was like 6'3", extremely long reach. So you have to imagine he was badly drained at that weight. But if you look at him fight, even in those days, like when he fought Arthur Abraham, for example, he was able to move laterally for 12 rounds while throwing an excessive amount of punches from long range. And when he needed to, he was able to get inside and work the body and kind of fight Mexican style, as they kind of call it. And to me, he was such a versatile fighter. And the way that he utilizes the southpaw stance, the way that he sticks that right jab to the body and moves to the right and is able to completely and utterly negate and take away the opponent's jab. Like, very rarely will you see Ramirez get hit with a jab from an orthodox opponent. I just think the guy's supremely talented. I think he's one of the most technically and like gifted fighters in the sport. And I remember back in the day when people were talking about him potentially fighting Gennady Golovkin, I was one of the few people out there that was saying that he would beat Gennady Golovkin and beat him convincingly. And I was saying this back then, and you guys know I rate Gennady Golovkin very, very highly. But yeah, I don't think Triple G would have even beaten Ramirez. Now, I know the next part of this video is going to be a little bit controversial. A few people in particular are going to get very triggered by this. But you guys will recall that when Kubrat Ramirez fought Bivol, something about that fight didn't sit right with me. And what didn't sit right with me is the fact that Ramirez showed, in my personal opinion, in the first 3 rounds of that fight, that if he wanted to, he could completely and utterly dominate Dmitry Bivol. Because what I saw in the first few rounds of that fight was I saw Ramirez, who was the bigger guy, longer reach, and without a shadow of a doubt, the stronger, more durable guy of the two. I saw him establish some sort of lead hand control over Bivol, and I saw he was able to hit Bivol with the jab, and he was able to hit Bivol to the body, more importantly, with his backhand. Like, he was able to easily land left hands to the body on Bivol from long range. So, what never sat right with me about that fight is the fact that after the 3rd round, Kubrat Ramirez just stopped boxing. Like, literally just stopped. And I couldn't get my head around it. Like, why did he stop? What was it about Dmitry Bivol? What did Dmitry Bivol do to negate the clear, obvious physical and tactical advantages that Ramirez had over him? My personal opinion, you don't have to agree, this is just my opinion, and this fight against Arsene Gulamerian confirmed this for me. Kubrat Ramirez threw the fight against Dmitry Bivol. It's my personal opinion. I think it was a fixed fight. You don't have to agree, but looking at the fight in retrospect, I can't think of a single reason why he just stopped throwing punches and wouldn't apply pressure. You look at this fight, this is at cruiserweight, okay? Arsene Gulamerian much bigger man than Dmitry Bivol, significantly bigger puncher than Dmitry Bivol. Not only that, significantly more aggressive, significantly stronger, a guy who in some ways is a bit more versatile. Like I said, he has that Murat Gassiev Triple G approach to boxing where he likes to back you up and throw light punches to your guard to get you to expose your body and then hit you to the body with hard hooks and finish up top. That wasn't working on Ramirez, and the reason it wasn't working on Ramirez wasn't just because Ramirez was the technically better of the two, but it was also because Ramirez was physically stronger and physically more durable. He was actually able to push Gulamerian back in many instances of this fight. It actually reminded me of when Joe Calzaghe fought Jeff Lacey, and even though Jeff Lacey was the stronger guy and the bigger puncher, Calzaghe was still able to stand inside with Lacey, exchange with him, and push him back because he was able to utilise the southpaw stance and better positioning inside, and he was a bit more economical with how he used his strength, and he was obviously a lot more fit and a lot more experienced, so that helped him with it. That was what this looked like to me. So I'm thinking to myself, how does Gilberto Ramirez stand toe-to-toe with a big punching cruiserweight like Arsen Gulamerian, but he's scared to throw punches against a guy like Dmitry Bivol, who's significantly smaller than him and who doesn't typically knock guys out at world level? Somebody's going to need to explain that to me, but to me it kind of confirmed, this fight did anyway, it kind of confirmed the suspicions that I had about that fight. So yeah, I think Gilberto Ramirez is going to be a major problem at cruiserweight, and I think he's going to upset several guys there. In fact, I would not be at all surprised if he were able to beat, what's his name, Jaya Pitaya. I would not be at all surprised if he were able to beat Jaya Pitaya. So if that fight happens, that's going to be a very interesting one. And I think cruiserweight is Ramirez's natural division, and I think he'll do so much better there. So yeah, very impressed with Gilberto Ramirez. And yeah, that's pretty much my summary, my rambling thoughts about the events of boxing that took place last night. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. God bless.